Hi automotive enthusiasts, welcome to Octane Origins, where today we're diving into one of the most thrilling, feared, and unforgettable machines in motorcycle history, the 1972 Kawasaki H2 Mach 4, better known by its ominous nickname, the Widowmaker. This isn't just another story about a fast bike, it's a tale of ambition colliding with physics, of riders chasing speed at the exact moment manufacturers were pushing the boundaries of what was mechanically possible, and of how one motorcycle came to symbolize both the glory and the danger of the early superbike era. When Kawasaki unveiled the H2 Mach 4, it wasn't trying to play safe. The company had already made waves with the smaller but lightning-quick H1 500 Triple, and the H2 was designed to double down on that philosophy. A 750cc two-stroke triple, in a time when most riders were still adjusting to far tamer machines, meant that this motorcycle wasn't just fast, it was explosively fast. It was capable of quarter-mile runs in under 13 seconds, a blistering number for the era, and its top speed made it one of the most powerful production motorcycles in the world. But power wasn't the whole story. What really set the H2 apart was how violently that power arrived. The engine's power band delivered an almost docile cruise at low revs. And then, with a twist of the throttle, it unleashed a sudden, overwhelming surge of acceleration that could catch even experienced riders off guard. Without modern traction control, electronic rider aids, or even particularly stiff suspension, the result was a machine that could thrill 1 second and terrify the next. This was why the H2 earned its deadly nickname. It wasn't just a bike that demanded respect, it demanded mastery, and even then, it could turn against you. So why did Kawasaki build such a beast? What was happening in the motorcycle world that made a company believe the market wanted something this unhinged? And how did a single model burn itself into motorcycling legend as both a hero and a villain of its time? In this story, we'll peel back the layers of the H2 Mach 4, exploring the cultural and engineering forces that birthed it, the raw experiences of those who tried to tame it, and the lasting shadow it cast on motorcycling for decades to come. By the end, you'll understand not only how the Widowmaker came to be, but why its legend still echoes every time riders talk about the line between speed and survival. Strap in, because this journey through the 1972 Kawasaki H2 Mach 4 is going to ride the razor's edge of motorcycling history. The Kawasaki H2 Mach 4 didn't appear in a vacuum. It was the product of a competitive, arms race in the motorcycle world that defined the early 1970s. Companies across Japan were trying to outdo one another in the pursuit of speed, and Kawasaki, still building its identity against rivals like Honda and Yamaha, chose the boldest path: build the fastest, most outrageous machine money could buy. That gamble produced a motorcycle that, on paper, was a technical marvel, but on the road, it carried consequences no one could ignore. Microstory. In the late 1960s, Kawasaki engineers watched as Honda stunned the market with its four-cylinder CB750. Instead of matching Honda's refinement, Kawasaki doubled down on raw power. The H2 750cc two-stroke triple was tuned for brutal acceleration, not smooth delivery. Riders described the experience like lighting a fuse: calm at idle, a rising hum as revs climbed, then an uncontrollable rocket surge that lifted the front wheel. In traffic, that meant constant vigilance. On open roads, it meant exhilaration edged with real fear. Kawasaki had created not just a motorcycle, but a test of courage. Context Digest. The two-stroke engine was central to the H2's reputation. Unlike four-strokes, which build power more evenly, two-strokes dump power suddenly when the revs hit the sweet spot. This made them perfect for drag racing and short bursts of speed, but much less predictable on winding roads. The Mach 4 amplified this quirk with sheer displacement, making it feel like a lion waiting to pounce every time the throttle twisted. Microstory. Riders soon learned the H2's handling didn't match its speed. Its frame was little more than an adapted version from smaller bikes, not designed to handle 74 horsepower unleashed in an instant. On smooth highways, it was manageable, but on rougher roads, the chassis flexed, the suspension wobbled, and riders found themselves in unintended tank slappers. The bike seemed to whisper, "Control me, or I'll control you." This unpredictability gave the Mach 4 both its legendary status and its chilling nickname. Reflection bridge. Power without control is thrilling in short doses, but it becomes a liability the longer you ride. That tension shaped the H2's place in history. Microstory. Magazines of the era didn't shy away from dramatic language when describing the H2. Testers praised its quarter-mile times, but warned that average riders might find themselves in over their heads. Dealers knew it was a bike that sold on reputation alone. If you could handle the H2, you had bragging rights that few could claim. But behind those headlines, insurance companies were quietly raising premiums, and safety advocates were beginning to wonder if motorcycles had crossed a dangerous line. Context Digest. The H2 wasn't alone in pushing limits. Yamaha had its RD series, Suzuki was experimenting with triples, and Honda was building four-strokes with an emphasis on stability. Each company had its philosophy, but Kawasaki's was the most extreme. Raw speed first, refinement later. This divergence made the Mach 4 stand out as both a halo product and a cautionary tale. Micro-story. On drag strips, the H2 was a king. Riders lined up to launch the Widowmaker down quarter-mile tracks, knowing they had a weapon that could humiliate larger displacement bikes. The spectacle drew crowds, and Kawasaki leaned into the marketing of speed. But outside the strip, everyday riders tried to replicate those thrills on city streets, often with consequences. Police forces began noticing the surge in fast, unpredictable two-stroke triples tearing through neighborhoods. The H2 had become more than a motorcycle. It was a cultural flashpoint. Reflection bridge. What thrilled some terrified others, and that duality made the Widowmaker impossible to ignore. Context Digest. By 1973 and 1974, stories about the H2 spread through motorcycle clubs, garages, and roadside cafes. Some claimed it was unrideable, others swore it was the ultimate test of skill. In truth, both were correct. It demanded riders with finesse, balance, and absolute respect for its power band. Those who underestimated it risked paying a steep price. Micro-story. Perhaps the most telling sign of the H2's impact was how quickly it became a legend among young riders. Even those who couldn't afford one spoke of it with reverence, swapping stories of wheelies gone wrong, near misses on twisty roads, or victorious drag races. The name Widowmaker wasn't invented by Kawasaki. It was earned in the real-world experiences of those who rode, crashed, or simply watched in awe. The myth grew larger than the motorcycle itself, a reputation that ensured its place in history long after production ended. And yet the H2's story was not just about danger, it was about evolution, forcing Kawasaki and the industry to face the consequences of unchecked performance, and that reckoning would define what came next. As the Kawasaki H2 Mach 4 gained notoriety, the motorcycle industry found itself at a crossroads. Riders wanted speed, but the headlines around the Widowmaker made it clear that sheer horsepower without refinement came at a price. Manufacturers were forced to confront the question, how do you deliver thrill without putting every rider on a knife's edge? The answer required not just better machines, but a shift in philosophy. Micro-story. For Kawasaki, the H2's reputation was both a blessing and a curse. Sales were strong in the early years because everyone wanted to experience the legend. But by 1974, complaints and cautionary tales were piling up. Rival brands marketed their bikes as safer and more stable, poking at Kawasaki's daredevil image. Engineers within the company recognized that the H2 could not be the long-term blueprint. It was too wild for the everyday rider. This realization planted the seeds for a new generation of superbikes, ones that could harness power without sacrificing control. Context Digest. Motorcycle magazines began framing the debate in terms of responsibility. Should companies keep chasing top speed at any cost or focus on refining handling, braking, and safety? The conversation reflected a wider cultural shift of the 1970s, as consumers demanded products that delivered excitement without unnecessary risk. For Kawasaki, the H2 served as a public experiment in finding that balance. Micro-story. The Widowmaker also became a proving ground for riders. In many local clubs, owning and surviving an H2 was seen as a badge of honor, proof that you had the skills to tame the untamable. Stories circulated of riders who learned throttle discipline, body positioning, and road awareness out of necessity because the bike punished mistakes instantly. Ironically, the very danger that made the H2 infamous also helped elevate riding technique across a generation of motorcyclists. Reflection bridge. The machine's unforgiving nature pushed riders and engineers alike to evolve, setting the stage for a safer, more advanced era of performance bikes. Micro-story. Insurance companies, however, weren't so romantic. With accident reports linked to high-powered two-strokes rising, premiums on bikes like the H2 spiked. Some riders were priced out before they even had the chance to buy one. This economic reality added another layer to the Widowmaker story. It wasn't just a motorcycle, it was a flashpoint in the debate about risk and reward in everyday transportation. Context digest. Kawasaki's rivals took note. Honda doubled down on four-cylinder refinement with better suspension and braking. Yamaha offered lighter two-strokes with more manageable power. Suzuki introduced models that blended speed with stability. The competition proved there was more than one way to chase the performance crown, and Kawasaki would eventually follow suit, channeling the lessons of the H2 into new approaches. Micro story. Even outside of the showroom, the H2 left its mark. Law enforcement agencies complained about its presence on the roads, as officers on standard patrol bikes couldn't keep up. At the same time, enthusiasts embraced its rebellious image, turning the Widowmaker into a cultural symbol of freedom and defiance. Posters, magazine covers, and personal anecdotes all kept the legend alive, amplifying its mystique far beyond its actual production numbers. Reflection bridge. The Widowmaker was no longer just a motorcycle. It had become a cultural touchstone, forcing conversations about the future of speed and the responsibilities of those who pursued it. Context digest. By the mid-1970s, Kawasaki began pivoting away from the formula that defined the H2. Four-stroke engines, improved chassis designs, and a focus on all-around performance started to take center stage. The Widowmaker had proven what was possible, but it also proved what needed to change. Micro story. Riders who mastered the H2 often found that transitioning to newer models made them faster, smoother, and safer on the road. In a strange way, the Widowmaker trained a generation for the superbikes of the 1980s and beyond. It was a harsh teacher, but one that left its students prepared for the evolution of motorcycling. And yet, even as the industry moved forward, the aura of the Widowmaker refused to fade. Its legend only grew as it transitioned from a current danger to a historic icon, setting the stage for its lasting legacy in the decades to come. Decades after its debut, the Kawasaki H2 Mach 4 remains one of the most polarizing motorcycles ever built. To some, it's a cautionary tale about what happens when engineering chases raw numbers without balance. To others, it's the ultimate example of a machine that demanded skill, courage, and respect, forging legends out of those who dared to ride it. That duality is exactly why the Widowmaker continues to capture imaginations today. Micro story. In the collector world, surviving examples of the H2 have become prized treasures. Restorers hunt for original parts, enthusiasts share painstaking rebuilds online, and auction houses see bidding wars for clean models. What once was dismissed as a dangerous relic is now a rolling piece of history, celebrated for its audacity. Owning one isn't about daily riding anymore. It's about owning a symbol of an era when motorcycles were raw, untamed, and unforgettable. Context digest. The resurgence of interest in vintage motorcycles has reframed the H2. No longer judged solely on safety, it's now appreciated as a cultural artifact. Like muscle cars of the same era, its flaws have become part of its charm. Collectors don't want perfection. They want the thrill of owning something that once terrified the streets. Micro story. For Kawasaki, the Widowmaker's legacy lives on in modern machines that carry the H2 badge. Today's supercharged H2 sport bikes bear little mechanical resemblance to the 1972 original, but the naming is no accident. It's a deliberate nod to the spirit of pushing boundaries, of building machines that sit just beyond the comfortable edge. The modern H2 family carries the torch, but with the safety and precision that the original lacked, proving how far the industry has come. Reflection bridge. The evolution from the unruly two-stroke triple to today's advanced superbikes shows how the lessons of the past shape the future. Micro story. Among riders, the H2 Mach 4 remains a benchmark for storytelling. In bike nights and online forums, tales of the Widowmaker resurface, the wheelies that came out of nowhere, the terrifying wobbles at high speed, the victories at drag strips. Whether the stories are firsthand or passed down, they keep the legend alive, ensuring new generations hear about the bike that demanded absolute respect. The H2 has become less about the machine itself and more about the mythos it created. Context digest. The Widowmaker nickname endures because it captures a universal tension in motorcycling, the fine line between exhilaration and danger. Every era has its machine that pushes too far, but few have left such an indelible mark. The H2 isn't remembered for balance or refinement. It's remembered for daring riders to confront their limits. Micro story. In hindsight, the H2 Mach 4 was more than just a motorcycle. It was a mirror reflecting the culture of its time. It showed the hunger for speed in a world still discovering what motorcycling could be, and it revealed the costs of chasing that hunger too aggressively. Today, its place in history is secure not because it was the best motorcycle, but because it was the one that defined the edge of what was possible. Reflection Bridge. Legends endure not because they are perfect, but because they are unforgettable, and the Widowmaker is nothing if not unforgettable. Context Digest. In every corner of motorcycling culture, collectors, racers, storytellers, the H2 is remembered with a mix of awe and caution. It is both a relic and a teacher, a reminder of how far we've come and how thin the line can be between triumph and disaster. Microstory. When you see one in person today, whether gleaming at a vintage show or idling at a meet, it's hard not to feel the weight of its reputation. The sight of that triple-cylinder engine, the glint of chrome, and the knowledge of what it once represented can send chills down a rider's spine. The Widowmaker's presence lingers long after the engine shuts off, proof that some machines transcend their mechanical parts and become legends etched into culture itself. The H2 Mach 4 was never meant to be forgotten, and its legacy as the Widowmaker ensures it never will be, standing as both a warning and a celebration of motorcycling's boldest era. The Kawasaki H2 Mach 4 stands as one of those rare machines that left an imprint far beyond its production years. It wasn't simply another motorcycle rolling off the line in the early 1970s. It became a cultural lightning rod, a symbol of how far ambition can stretch and how easily thrill can slip into danger. What began as Kawasaki's gamble in the horsepower wars grew into a legend that carried both fear and fascination. That's why, when we look back today, the H2 isn't remembered just for its numbers, but for the way it reshaped the conversation around performance. The Widowmaker's story is about contrasts. On one side, it was an engineering triumph, a two-stroke triple that redefined what a production bike could do in the quarter mile, that could pull riders into a rush few machines could match. On the other side, it was a stark reminder of the limits of technology at the time, where chassis, suspension, and braking struggled to keep pace with sheer power. That imbalance made it dangerous, but it also made it unforgettable. The stakes were real, and that authenticity is why its legend still resonates. Over time, the H2 has shifted from menace to myth. Collectors treasure it as an artifact of an untamed era. Kawasaki itself nods to its spirit with modern H2 models, now equipped with electronics and engineering sophistication that the original could never dream of. Riders share its stories as warnings, as bragging rights, or simply as campfire tales of the bike that tested everyone who threw a leg over it. The Widowmaker became more than a motorcycle. It became a rite of passage, a benchmark for courage, and a cultural shorthand for flirting with the edge of control. As automotive enthusiasts, we often ask why certain machines endure while others fade into obscurity. The answer lies in impact. The H2 Mach 4 left its mark not just because it was fast, but because it forced riders, engineers, and even society to reckon with what speed really means. That reckoning shaped the motorcycles that followed, proving that sometimes the wildest experiments leave the most lasting legacies. Thanks for riding with us on Octane Origins. See you next time, automotive enthusiasts.